You guys have UFC Fight Pass? I mean, I got to give you a plug. If you tell me that you're a huge fight fan and then you tell me you don't have UFC Fight Pass, like they kind of don't go together. Just in the last week, okay, you got Gordon Ryan versus Nicky Rod. You got a Mark Schultz Fight Lore. Now, Fight Lore is the greatest piece of production the UFC has ever attached its name to. That's a huge statement. And that's a category that was dominated by Embedded for years. Embedded has been passed up by Fight Lore. Then, they had a piece of this all in 1 week, right? You want to talk about a happy subscriber? They put out a piece behind the mask on Robert Follis. This was interesting for me. And definitely a positive. Definitely. But required some conversation. Let me tell you what I mean. Robert Follis was my coach. Robert Follis was my first coach. Robert Follis is one of the great coaches in MMA history, and this was a wonderful tribute they made to him. Robert lost his life 5 years ago. And it was just one of these things to come back and have those memories. They did such a good job. They had old footage of the old Team Quest days. Just by example, they told this story. They talked to family members. They talked to next of, if you will. They talked to athletes who he inspires. Just beautiful piece. But when it comes to an end, right, like there was a little bit of Robert that was still alive when you're watching the piece. And as soon as they fade to black and roll the credits, it just creates something inside. So I get on my phone and I'm talking to Nate Quarry and we're kind of going back and forth. And it was just a wonderful piece. Do you guys know the story of Robert Follis? That's all I'm here to ask you. Robert Follis and Jehovah's Witness. It's very important that you know that. And this was a big part of the story. But it's important that you know that for one reason. The Jehovah's Witness, per the story, were not allowed to participate in sports. And it had something to do, if I understood it right, with sweating. They weren't allowed to perspire. Okay, great. Set that aside. I don't want to get into a religious thing. I want to talk to you about, that means when Robert got into MMA, he had no background. Now, it turns out that Robert Follis, who I did not know, who went on to be my coach, who goes down as one of the great coaches ever, Eric Nixink was paying respects to Robert Follis. I mean, this is a great coach. What a good job. Went to my high school. I graduated in 95, and Robert graduated in 88. So once you have that, you start tracing it back, you start knowing, like, people, you start knowing the coaches, you start knowing things. So, you're asking these questions about Robert. He walks into MMA, and he didn't do that, by the way, right out of high school. He was like 30 years old. People don't realize that. Robert got into the sport like 30 years old, but he got into it kind of at the same time as Randy Couture. They formed a real bond and were kind of training and workout partners. Randy was 34. So Robert was a young guy as far as he knew, but he didn't lift weights. He didn't do track and field and sprint. So he's got to start his body from day one. And he made it pretty far. I mean, not for nothing, he fought Trevor Prangley. And he fought him for the entire damn time limit. Prangley goes on to be champion of organization. So Robert's working hard. He's working hard. But he said he's got a deficit. You could see why. You're starting at 30 years old. You have absolutely no background. He's got a deficit. He's working hard. He's working hard. And one day we said, you know what? Why don't you stop? Why don't you stop pursuing the same dream that we are? Why don't you not be on the Aerodyne at 9:30, giving it your all and throwing up on your way out the door? Why don't you start coaching us? We need a coach and we don't have one. And Robert's number one thing for getting into MMA, as I could observe, was to participate, was to be part of something. A lot of what many of us did at 7, 9, 12 years old. We got to be part of teams. He got to be part of a team. So he no problem coaching. Let's work this out. Let's get some times. Let's get some schedules, but let's also get something clear. It's hard to do. When you're one of the boys and you're a friend, it's very hard to all of a sudden I'm in charge. It's hard. So you're all going to commit to it right now, and I am in charge. And we all committed to it. We all agreed. And one thing that Robert Follis did that no other coaches did, one thing that Robert Follis did that no coach that I had ever had at that point had done is he showed up to practice on time and he had a plan. Every day at 3, not 3:01, every day at 3, Robert was on the mat and he had a plan. We would come to the door and he would tell us what to put on. Step number 1, are we going big gloves, little gloves? Are we going shin pads, headgear? What are we going? rash guards? Are we going no gi? I mean, it was just one of these things. He had that plan. Also, we'd have to do any thinking. Now it's just listen to him and follow. Well, then he wanted to get better at it. And he already had a good understanding because Robert had come under Matt Thornton. So he had a very good understanding of the ground. He'd been working with Randy of the wrestling. And of course, he understood the kickboxing. He was a long, lanky guy himself. But he really wanted to be a student. We would have seminars in town that came through. I went to a seminar that Eddie Bravo was putting on just by example. I pay my dues. I go in. I said, Robert is already on the mat and he's got a pad. This was Robert's big move is he would have a pad and paper just like a student. He would take notes. He didn't want to forget things. He would forget, right? I never had to forget. I could just see it. He couldn't. He knew it about himself. He would take notes. Well, he ended up, man, he had books and books of notes. This is what Hickson says, and this was what Matt Thornton taught me, and this is what Eddie Bravo showed over here. Is one of these things. He never stopped learning. He didn't have a black belt. And Robert had quit competing, as I said, roughly 30. I'm throwing numbers out. He could have been 32 by then, something along these lines, 33. But he had stopped and went over to coaching. And next thing you know, he has world champions. Well, Randy Couture would be a great example. Evan Tanner would be a great example. So he didn't have a black belt. Why would he get one? Why would he possibly pursue one? He has gold belts. His world championship, well, no, it was important to him. He had a respect towards the craft. And he found Michael Chapman. He said, I want to be your student. I'm going to come in and I have a goal of getting a black belt. And he worked his way up. And he ended up leaving Team Quest, which is important. And he went out to Extreme Couture. He was doing a great job out there. He touched a lot of lives. And he really didn't get the credit. I mean, I must tell you. And that's not, I'm not saying that from a perspective that he deserved more praise. He did. But that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying from a perspective he deserved more money. He did. I'm saying it from a perspective of he's now gone and you can't thank him. And he changed people's lives. Can you say that? Not very many people that can. But you know the people that helped change yours. You know the people that got involved in yours that you didn't thank and you didn't pay. You didn't know how to. You didn't have enough money to pay them to show them your gratitude. And thank you wasn't a strong enough term, right, guys? Yeah, done the same thing. I understand. I understand you think, well, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it next week. It was just one of these really interesting situations. And whatever was bothering Robert, we just have to speculate now. And that was a little bit a part of the show. And I don't mind that. I think if you're telling a story, it's important to speculate. I will just share for you guys privately. We don't actually know. There was many guesses. From family, from the way he grew up, that he had some pains like that about demons that he was drinking. I mean, I just want to tell you. Robert and I knew quit drinking. Travel the roads with him. You were the worst version of yourself on the road. For sure. This guy was an angel. I never saw him have a drop. So if that's part of the story, I won't change his story. His story is his story. I will just tell you that from my standpoint, that'd be speculation. I don't even know that I believe that's true. I don't know what was bothering him. He had something. And he was always the leader. He was a very, very good leader. Robert could come in a room of killers that could kill him. And he would be in charge. You know how hard that is to do? I mean, that's a very, very rare skill. You walk into a room full of alpha males and you're calling the shots. It's a very hard thing to do. And respect is not given, respect is earned, but he earned it. And he did it the easy way. He was there, on time, with a plan. He cared. He looked to improve. He wanted you to improve. You didn't thank him. He'd be there for you the next day anyway, even if you should have. You stiffed him on money, and a bunch of you pricks did. He wouldn't say a word, and he'd be there for you again the next day. It's a really interesting story. Fight Pass did a great job. And he was a great guy. I just wanted to say my piece.